Hello, and welcome back to the channel We Don't Know Why. My name's Trey, and we're coming at you guys with an episode of Treys Car Talks. Again, not in Trey's car, but that's okay. Anyways, so I have been putting around making one of these episodes for a little while because there's been plenty to talk about, and I know the political news, especially the more doom and gloom stuff, gets views. The video I did on the possible gas crisis and stuff, it almost has 400 views. It's one of the more watched videos on the channel, which I know 400 views isn't a whole lot, but it's a lot for us. So I've been putting it around. It's just been so depressing. I have yet to sit down to talk about it. But it's a beautiful day. I've got beer, and that's enough to get over the depressing part of the whole news cycle in the last 3 months or so. Oh God. But anyways, we're going to talk about the economy today. That's what we're going to talk about. Let's get into it. So, the economy. I imagine most of you out there have noticed that everything is significantly more expensive than it was even a couple of years ago, right? Everything since COVID, right, has just gone absolutely nutso. And there's a lot to that. The spending has gone out of control in the federal government, as well as a lot of the, the stimulus and stuff like that. It shoved a bunch of money into a system that was, that it wasn't really accounted for, right? And it's caused this massive inflationary spiral. And again, these massive spending bills, when they talk about like 3.5 trillion or $5 trillion budgets and stuff like that from the federal government, that's money that really doesn't exist. So it makes sense that there is the economic consequences from that, right? And those are rather predictable, to be honest. And everyone who said, oh, it won't be that way, of course, was an idiot, or they just were lying to you because they knew that that was going to be the case, right? Because that's how it happens when you shove a bunch of stuff into a system that it's not really accounted for. You're going to have problems, just how it is, right? So that makes a lot of sense. But not only the massive inflationary issue, right, with all the prices and everything, your gas, your food, your power, your everything, right? Everything is up. There is this little thing that's been happening with some countries, a group of countries known as the BRICS. Might look it up, that basically they've been going around. They've been getting a lot of countries around the world to agree to ditch the U.S. dollar as the, kind of known, like the global trade currency, basically, right? Like, because we've been the economic powerhouse of the world and kind of the world's police and everything, right? We were the superpower after the Cold War, we cemented ourselves in that place on purpose, and we built our entire economy and the way we do business, the way the world does business around that. And we're starting to see that finally shift. There's a pretty major shift that's happening there. And that shift is bad news. That's one of those things that I think a lot of people aren't realizing right now, right? Especially if you're not in the political sphere, if you're not really paying attention to some of those things. This is one of those that could slip by you, but I guarantee the dollar being ditched is significantly bigger, of a deal than even the inflation or, massive spending or anything like that, right? Because here's the overall problem, right? So since like the 70s, I forget what the exact year was, right? We haven't been on the gold standard. So what gave our dollar value before 1970 something was gold and silver, right? It was actually backed. And when you look at a bill, it still says it's a Federal Reserve note, right? It's a bank note, right? And that was back then. You got a bill. It was technically worth that amount of gold, right? Or silver or whatever it was. We haven't been backed by gold or silver or anything like that for a very long time. So all that's given our dollar value since really the end of the Cold War is that the entire world considered it valuable, right? And when you're truly not backed by any physical assets, the currency is only worth the faith that people have in your currency, right? Which, of course, is not awesome, because at this point, it's just fucking hopes and dreams. So with the world seeming to have a massive shift to what presumably will be Chinese currency, our currency will fall out of favor, and if it's not worth anything, it's not worth anything. And that means not only problems, right, where there'll be this massive global economic shift, there'll have to be a national global, or a national global shift, oh my gosh, a national economic shift as well. Because if our currency is not worth anything and the world doesn't have faith in our currency, then how can we have faith in our currency? So you start to look at some of those things, and we could get into the more conspiracy aspects of it with a global, or with a global digital, or even a US digital dollar and stuff like that. I'm not really going to talk about that right now. It's kind of a separate thing, but the economic turmoil is kind of what I'm getting at here. So there's a lot of factors that are playing into a very fragile economic situation right now. So we have our massive, inflationary spiral that is still truly going out of control. There are some people out there, the experts, that will tell you, oh, everything's fine, it's getting better. You know it's not getting better. I know it's not getting better, because shit's still expensive, right? We see it every day, right? When you get that check and it's not taking you, half as far as it used to. We all know that there's still a problem. That, the global trade currency thing, and then there's the banks that have been going under. And it seems right now it's small enough of an issue with the banking system that the Fed is trying to, cover their ass a little bit there. And they've just did today or yesterday or whatever it was, the First Republic Bank, I believe is what it's called. They just basically took that one, right? They acquired that one and sold it to JP Morgan to save all the depositors at that bank. And then there was, of course, the Silicon Valley Bank and the other bank that happened, a month and a half ago or so, right? That the first two banks, Silicon Valley Bank and the other one, right, that was, people were worried that was going to start, run on the banks and everything was going to go absolutely belly up. The Fed stepped in really quick and bailed out the depositors of those banks very quickly, right? And swept that under the rug as fast as they freaking could. Because, of course, a run on the banks is the last thing that the Federal Reserve wants, right? And that the Fed wants in general, because then we really are, shit's hitting the fan quick, right? And now we go from a 2008 economic crisis to a 1920 economic crisis, and we really are treading that line, right, where we are right on the verge of, yes, it could stay kind of mild the way it is, right? You can guarantee the housing market's going to suffer. The banks are clearly still suffering, right? But it could not be as bad as 2008, or it could be a little worse than 2008, but not too crazy. And they're trying to walk that line because it is a fucking slippery and steep slope to the 20s, in a true Great Depression in a modern sense, right? And of course, they're just trying to toe that line, because they don't want that. That would be bad news, especially with an election, just around the corner in 2024. So I guess that's just what I wanted to talk about, is all that crazy shit, because you start thinking about it, and it doesn't look like there's a way they're going to be able to walk this back. They are trying really hard, and they are really just tiptoeing with the rate hikes, trying not to drive us into, an economic collapse. But it doesn't look like it's going to, be enough to stop that from happening. And I guess what you do about that, I don't know. The individual, best you can do is, try to do your best to get some physical assets. I've been getting into silver myself lately. Gold is too expensive for me, I'm a young guy just working my ass off, and I'm just taking a little bit out of every time I get paid, buying a little bit of silver, because silver, gold, and I know some people don't believe it or whatever, but they've always had some value, so even if that is, something that you end up trading at some point, it's good to have, right? Because if your dollar ends up not being worth anything, and it would realistically, we'd be looking at that kind of scenario if the world ditched our dollar, right? We would have a dollar that was truly worth nothing, even though it's kind of worth nothing now. We just still have faith in it, not for long though, in my opinion. Anyways, physical assets, that's what you could probably do, right? That's what I would recommend. And everyone's got their own ideas. That's my solution to it right now, is working on the physical asset side of things. Silver, gold, copper, stuff like that. Stuff that is like you can touch, and has always had a value. So there's that, and I think this whole economic thing it's a real disaster. You start really thinking about this stuff, and it's just crazy. And like I said, I don't know how you walk it back, from this ledge. I know a lot of people in the conservative media, and of course in the left side of the aisle, are trying to be really optimistic about it. There are some that are really like, yeah, this ain't good, and this definitely looks like some hard times. And there are others who are trying not to be so doom and gloom, which I get. I'm kind of a pessimist myself. Okay, we'll say I'm a realist, but I'm kind of a pessimist myself. So I always like to think when it comes to this kind of stuff in the worst case scenario, because if you think worst case scenario, you're prepared for the worst case scenario. And if it, doesn't happen that way, then you were over prepared, and there's nothing wrong with that in this case. So yeah, there's that, and I just think it's kind of interesting, and it's kind of fascinating too, because we have this very bizarre time that we're in, right? It's so weird, because people who've been around for a while, right, older people are like, well, we've never really seen anything like this. We've had some bad ups and downs, but this looks like it could be really bad. Then you have others of the same age group, 60s, 70s, that are saying, we have seen stuff like this before, it's not going to be that bad. And then you have younger people, right, and I'm talking like 50 to like 30, right, who kind of had to deal with 2008 and have had to deal with some other minor ups and downs and stuff, and they're looking at it like, yeah, it's probably, most of the opinion there, I think, is that it's going to be more of a 2008 style, downturn, where, maybe the housing market will go in the dumps, some banks will, fail here and there, but the Fed will bail everyone out, and it'll be a good time. And then there's like my perspective. I'm 21, and I haven't really lived through anything crazy. Of course, I was alive during the 2008 downturn, and I saw a little bit of those effects, but of course I wasn't living an adult life at that point, so I didn't understand that. But I do now, right? Being able to go back and look at it and hearing perspectives and, knowing some of the history there. And then I'm looking also at even older times, in the Great Depression and stuff, and that's stuff that they teach, in history class. I'm looking at it and thinking, we have a very bizarre blend of all the things that went wrong in both crises, right? Where you have this massive spending and banks, being taking a little too much, taking too many risks and stuff like that, right? They're really pushing the boundaries, right? And maybe even over leveraging themselves and stuff like that, right? Where you could easily see chance for some kind of weird blend where it could be some epic failure of, unseen proportions, or it could be something like 2008. And it's really kind of crazy to see. You're looking at it, and every day you hear something new. Some days you wake up and you're like, oh, well, here's some good news, things are getting better. This is that. This went down, whatever else. And then other days you're like, well, shit, another bank just failed. A pretty major bank just failed, and the Fed had to sweep that one under the rug quick too. Which doesn't give you a whole lot of confidence that it's going to be a smooth landing. And I can't say the Federal Reserve is known for its smooth landings, okay? But I do think it's hilarious too, and I think we got to recognize this, right? As people who are just out there, and we're just trying to pick up all the information that we can. We're looking at the media sources, and even some of the more right-wing, stuff. If you're more right-wing, you say you can trust it, or even left-wing, you say you can trust it. They're all trying to say the same thing. Oh, it's not that bad, right? And I've even heard some of that on, like some of the conservative talk radio that I listen to. They've had experts on, fucking experts, my ass, with the expert shit. I don't even understand it. But they've had experts on that are saying, yep, the Fed is leading us right to the smoothest landing we've ever seen in history. And then a week later, 2 major banks fail, and then a month later, another major bank fails, and the Fed's just trying to fucking sweep that shit under the rug as fast as they can, right? So I don't think in any way, shape, or form there's any facts that suggest we're going in for a smooth landing. I don't think that's even remotely fair. to say. And I think if you're saying that, you're lying, right? You're just trying to, I don't know, maybe you have too much positivity, or you have a reason to lie to people. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think most people, that are just, working class people, middle class, upper middle to, lower middle class, just all over the middle class is really feeling that, and I don't think anyone really believes this is going to be a smooth landing. So the question is, how bad is it going to get, and what should we be prepared for, I guess? I'm no expert, so I don't know how bad it's going to get. In my opinion, my very pessimistic, realist opinion, I think it's probably going to get pretty bad. I think there's enough things that are going wrong at once that we could end up with a situation significantly worse than the Great Depression. Especially with the way our economy's built, we had some resiliency then, that we could get ourselves out of an economic crisis, right, in the 20s and stuff, right, when FDR kind of charged, went for the war, and all that stuff, and really bolstered the U.S. economy and production and all that jazz, and kind of ripped us out of a bad time by bolstering our economy in other ways. We could get out of things like that. But today, the way it works is so different from the way it has ever worked, because we're such a global-based economy. There's only so much we can do domestically to pull ourselves out of a crisis, because we depend on the rest of the world, right, to truly function, right, as an economy, which is crazy, but it is the way it is, and it was built that way. After the Cold War, the whole world decided to push for some globalist movement, that didn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but they did it, and we tried it, and it has not been very long, and we can already see that a lot of that stuff is not going very well. And all it takes is the rest of the world saying, hey, we're not using the US dollar, not even the rest of the world, just enough of the big players to say, we don't trade in the US dollar anymore. You have to trade in the yen, right? You have to trade in China's currency if you want to do business with us. And that's all it takes, before our currency is completely defunct, right? And it doesn't matter anymore. So I think that's crazy. And that, to me, with all the stuff, even stuff that's happening, domestically, I think that really is of no consequence. If the world ditches our currency, I think we're just in trouble in general, right? I just don't think any of it will matter, because our dollar has nothing. We have nothing at that point, right? Which is a problem. I don't know about you guys. I don't want to be fucking using no Chinese currency or some digital shit either. I don't want to do that. I don't feel comfortable even using true paper money, right? Because it doesn't mean anything. When you look at it and you think about all the shit that they do with money and how they just print more of it every year, and our taxes really only pay for a fraction of it, right? You're like, well, this money doesn't really mean anything, which never makes anyone comfortable, and it just means less now than it really ever has. So that makes you kind of worried. And that's why I stress again the physical assets part of thing, and there's no replacement for if things get really bad, for having food and water and stuff. So always, and you don't have to be some prepper, right? Some crazy person who believes in all the conspiracies to do stuff like this. All you have to do is recognize, there's been a lot of things that have mixed up the way we live in the last couple of years. Just with COVID alone, the number of things that you couldn't get in stores with the supply chain bottlenecks and stuff like that, it can happen, and I think we can all see that now, and you don't have to be crazy to believe that, right? It's not like, your crazy uncle where he's got a cabin in the woods with, an arsenal and enough food to last him 20 years or some shit, right? You just have to be prepared. I'd recommend, stocking up food, water, stuff like that. Just make sure you have it, right? It's always good to have, and now more than ever, it's good to have. And for me, I've been in a point where I can finally start saving money, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to save this money that's worth nothing, right? I'm not going to shove my hard-earned money in some bank savings account. I don't care about the fucking interest. I don't. Because if those banks collapse, the Fed bails shit out, if it's this, if it's that, it doesn't mean anything, right? That money could easily disappear, and I could have no control over it. So that's why I'm going to physical assets for my savings, right? And I think that's not a bad play, Everyone will do their own thing, but that's just where I'm at right now. Anyways, this is not going to be a super long episode, so maybe I'll actually get some decent viewership out of it. Just some stuff, I'm not necessarily offering a ton of solutions. There's a lot of opinion and questions, because I would really love to hear what you all have to say about it, and maybe come back to this with some of the questions that people that watch this might pose, right? And I think that would be really fun and good to do. This will be coming out, well, it's Monday, so it'll be coming out next Monday. I don't know what the hell the date is. It's the 1st, so I don't know. It'll be coming out, a Monday, maybe even the end of maybe even this week. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's just that. Just some stuff to chew on, stuff to think about. Again, I would love to hear what y'all have to say about it and what y'all think about it. Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's good? Do you think we're in for a smooth landing or a really rough ride? Let me know. With that being said, I'm Trey with We Don't Know Why, signing off. I'll see you guys in the next one.